You're telling me a respectable businessman just vanished? No trace, no warning, and absolutely no explanation? That sounds like something straight out of a ghost story.
That's exactly what makes this case so eerie. Neville St. Clair wasn't just some ordinary guy off the street. He was wealthy, well-dressed, a pillar of his little suburban community, a devoted husband with a doting wife, 2 adorable kids waiting for him at home. One moment, he's seen standing at the window of a shady opium den in London's East End, looking like a man caught in a nightmare. The next, poof, he's gone. No one can explain how or why he disappeared into thin air.
And this wasn't just some vague sighting by a random stranger on the street, right? Someone actually saw him and knew for certain it was him?
Not just anyone. His wife, Issa Whitney St. Clair, she was right there, in the flesh. Picture this. It's a dreary Monday afternoon, in late autumn, 1889. The fog's rolling thick through London, the kind that clings to your coat and stings your eyes. Mrs. St. Clair had gone into town for some mundane errands, picking up a parcel, maybe a new hat for the season, nothing out of the ordinary. She's cutting through Upper Swandam Lane, a grimy little alley she'd normally avoid, like the plague. It's not her usual route, too rough, too dangerous, but maybe she was in a hurry that day.
Let me guess, her husband? She just happened to look up and there he was? That's not a coincidence, Jordan.
Exactly, Alex. She's trudging along, head down against the damp, when something pulls her gaze upward. Maybe a flicker of movement, maybe instinct. And there he is, Neville St. Clair, framed in the grimy second-floor window of the Bar of Gold, this seedy opium den that squats in the shadows of the East End. For a heartbeat, their eyes lock. He's pale as death, his face twisted in this desperate, terrified expression, like he's pleading with her silently. His hands press against the glass, trembling, like he's trying to signal something urgent.
That's terrifying. If you saw someone you love staring down at you like that, frozen in fear, it'd send a chill right through you. What did she do?
She froze for a second, her breath catching in her throat. Imagine it. Your husband, the man who kissed you goodbye that morning over breakfast, now looking like a trapped animal in a place like that. Before she can even shout his name, he lurches forward, like he's about to bang on the window or leap out. But then bam, a rough, shadowy figure appears behind him, grabs him by the shoulders, and yanks him back into the darkness of the room. The window's empty in an instant, like he was never there.
And she just stood there in shock, right? I mean, anyone would. Did she scream, run for help?
She told the police later that her knees nearly gave out, but she didn't waste time. She bolted straight for the opium den's door, shoving past a couple of stumbling sailors lurking outside. The place is a haze of smoke and misery. Opium fumes so thick you can taste them, men sprawled out on dirty mats, muttering to themselves. She doesn't care about the stares or the stench. She storms up to the owner, this wiry guy named Lascar, and grabs him by the collar. "Where's my husband?" she demands, voice shaking but fierce. "I saw him, upstairs, at that window. Where is he?"
And what does this Lascar guy say? Let me guess. He plays dumb, right? Pretends he's got no clue?
Spot on. Lascar pries her hands off him, smirking like she's some hysterical housewife. "Lady," he says, "I don't know what you're on about. No fancy gentleman's been in here today, or ever. You must have seen a ghost." His voice is oily, too smooth, like he's used to dodging questions.
Yeah, because innocent men always get dragged away from windows and opium dens and vanish. That excuse is pathetic.
Totally. Mrs. St. Clair's not buying it for a second. She pushes past him, shouting Neville's name, racing up this rickety staircase that creaks under every step. She's throwing open doors, peering into every shadowy corner, half expecting to find him crumpled in a heap or worse. The other patrons barely glance up, lost in their drugged stupors. And then, in one of those upstairs rooms, she stops dead.
Let me guess. She found evidence? Something proving he'd been there? Blood on the floor? A torn piece of his shirt?
Not quite blood, but something stranger. There on the floor of this dingy little room, barely bigger than a closet, she finds his coat. His good wool overcoat, the one she'd seen him wear 100 times, neatly folded in a little square. And on top of it, a small stack of coins, pennies and shillings, glinting dully in the flickering gaslight.
Wait, that's weird. If there had been a fight or an attack, why would his coat be folded so carefully? And what's with the money? It's almost like he left it there on purpose.
Exactly what she thought. She picks up the coat, clutching it to her chest, and whispers, "Neville, what's happened to you?" The coins scatter as she lifts it, rolling across the floor like they're mocking her. It's too deliberate, too staged, like someone wanted her to find this exact scene. Her mind's racing. Is he dead? Kidnapped? Why leave his coat behind?
So what's her next move? She's got to go to the police after that, right?
Oh, immediately. She stumbles out of the den, coat still in her arms, and runs straight to the nearest police station, tears streaming down her face. She's babbling to the desk sergeant, "My husband's missing. I saw him. They've done something to him." And within 20 minutes, a squad of officers storms back to the bar of gold with her in tow. They tear the place apart, kicking over furniture, hauling Lascar out by his shirt, searching every nook and cranny.
And they find nothing? No body, no sign of a struggle?
Not a trace of Neville St. Clair. The upstairs room's empty now. No coat, no coins, nothing but a stale whiff of opium. Lascar's sticking to his story, all shrugs and sneers. "Told you, no gentleman's been here." The police drag him in for questioning anyway, but they've got no real evidence to hold him. And then, just as they're about to call it a bust, they notice someone else in the den.
Who's the other guy?
A beggar. This filthy red-haired wreck of a man with a twisted lip, scarred and ugly, the kind of face you'd cross the street to avoid. He's slumped in a corner, watching the chaos with these sharp, unblinking eyes. If you've ever roamed London's rougher streets, you might have heard of him, Hugh Boone, the local panhandler who's been haunting the East End for years.
Okay, now I've got questions. Why is he there? Is he just some bystander or is he mixed up in this?
Oh, he's way more than a bystander. The police grab him, figuring he might have seen something. They frisk him, and guess what they find tucked under his ragged coat?
I swear, if you tell me he's got something of Neville's, I'm going to lose it.
Then brace yourself, because they pull out Neville St. Clair's shirt and trousers, neatly rolled up and stashed under his arm.
What? That's it then. That's the proof. This beggar's got to be the key. He must have done something to Neville.
That's what the police think too. They slap cuffs on Boone right there, hauling him off to the station. Mrs. St. Clair's sobbing, "What have you done with him? Where's my husband?" But here's the hitch.
Let me guess, no real evidence?
Not a drop. They search the den again. Floorboards up, walls tapped, every inch scoured. No blood, no weapon, no sign Neville was ever there, beyond the clothes. Boone doesn't even flinch, just sits there, in his cell, muttering, "Never seen the man in me life. Found them duds in the street, I did." Lascar backs him up, swearing no gentleman ever crossed his threshold.
But Mrs. St. Clair saw him. She literally locked eyes with him. How do they explain that?
They can't. The police are stumped. Neville St. Clair's vanished like smoke, leaving nothing but a folded coat, some coins, and a beggar with his clothes. That's when Mrs. St. Clair decides she's had enough of Scotland Yard's fumbling. She sends a telegram to the one man who might crack this wide open.
Sherlock Holmes, right?
You bet. And now, Alex, it's time for the master to step in and unravel this mess. Holmes gets the wire that evening at 221B Baker Street. He's lounging by the fire, violin in hand, plucking out some moody little tune, when Mrs. Hudson bustles in with the message. He scans it, tosses the violin aside, and says, "Watson, my dear fellow, put down that medical journal. We've a puzzle worth solving tonight."
I love how he just drops everything the second a good mystery lands in his lap.
Oh, he's hooked instantly. Watson's grumbling, "Holmes, it's past 8, and I've got an early surgery tomorrow," but he's already grabbing his coat. They catch a hansom cab through the fog, and by 9, they're at the police station. Mrs. St. Clair's there, pale as a ghost, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. She spills the whole story. Neville at the window, the coat, the beggar, her voice cracking with every word.
She must be a wreck. One minute she's got a perfect life, the next her husband's swallowed up by London's underbelly.
Totally. Holmes listens, pacing the room, his eyes narrowing with every detail. When she finishes, he says, "Mrs. St. Clair, I'll need to see this opium den myself. But first, the man in custody. Take me to him." Inspector Tobias Gregson, who's been hovering nearby, shrugs and leads them down to the cells.
This is Hugh Boone, right? The beggar with Neville's clothes?
Yep. They step into this dank little cell. Stone walls, a single flickering lamp, and there's Boone, hunched in the corner. Watson gets his first good look. Matted red hair, a face twisted by some old scar or deformity, clothes that reek of the gutter. But his eyes, they're sharp, alive, cutting through the dim light like he's sizing them up.
Okay, that's creepy. Does he say anything? Defend himself?
Not a peep, just stares. Gregson's barking at him. "Come on, Boone, out with it. Where's St. Clair? What you do with him?" But Boone just smirks, silent as a stone. Holmes, though, he's not watching Boone's face. He's staring at his hands.
His hands? Why is that the thing he zeroes in on?
Because they don't fit. Boone's a wreck, filthy, scarred, clothes hanging off him like rags. But his hands, clean as a whistle, nails trimmed, not a callus in sight. They're the hands of a gentleman, not a street beggar. Watson notices it too, and whispers, "Holmes, those aren't the hands of a man who's lived rough." Holmes nods, a little gleam in his eye, and says, "Precisely, Watson. Fetch me a sponge and some warm water, Gregson."
Wait, he's going to wash the guy's hands? In a police cell?
Not his hands, his face. Gregson's baffled. "What's a sponge got to do with this, Holmes?" But he shrugs and sends a constable for it. When it arrives, Holmes doesn't hesitate. He dips the sponge, steps up to Boone, and starts scrubbing his face like he's cleaning a window pane.
You're kidding. Right there in front of everyone?
Oh, yeah. Boone squirms, but Holmes has him pinned. And as he scrubs, the dirt smears away, the grime peels off, and that twisted lip, it's fake, some kind of putty or wax. The red hair's a wig, slipping loose. In 30 seconds flat, Hugh Boone's gone. Standing there, blinking in the lamplight, is Neville St. Clair.
No way. The missing guy and the suspect are the same person? That's insane.
The room explodes. Gregson's jaw drops. "What in blazes?" Watson's stammering. "Holmes, how did you—" Mrs. St. Clair lets out this choked sob, rushing forward. "Neville, oh, thank God," and collapses against him. Neville just stands there, head bowed, looking like a man who's been caught stealing from the cookie jar.
I can't even process this. He's alive, and he's been hiding as a beggar this whole time? Why?
That's what Gregson wants to know. He grabs Neville by the arm. "Explain yourself, St. Clair. If you're not dead, where have you been? Why the disguise? And what's with the bloody coat they found by the river? Mrs. St. Clair pulls back, staring at him like she's seeing a stranger. Neville, she whispers, what have you done?
Yeah, because right now, this still looks shady as hell. Even if he's alive, there's a lot he's got to answer for.
Holmes holds up a hand. Give him a moment, Inspector. Let's hear the man out. Neville sighs, rubs his newly scrubbed face, and starts talking. Turns out this whole mess, his vanishing, the beggar act, it wasn't some grand criminal plot. It was a career move.
A career move? You're telling me this rich guy chose to live as a beggar? For money? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Oh, but it's brilliant in its own twisted way. Neville explains, years ago, he was a reporter, digging into London's underbelly for a story. One day, he stumbled across a truth that flipped his world upside down. Some beggars, the really good ones, were raking in more cash than he'd ever see slaving over a typewriter. Out of curiosity, he tried it himself. Slapped on some makeup, a fake scar, tattered clothes, and sat on a corner with a tin cup. By nightfall, he'd made double his weekly wage.
That's wild. So he just kept going? Ditched his job to beg full-time?
Not at first. It started as a lark, a weird little experiment. But the coins kept piling up, and it was so easy. No deadlines, no editor breathing down his neck. He'd leave home in the morning, duck into a rented room near the East End, transform into Hugh Boone, and spend the day limping around, muttering sob stories to passers-by. By evening, he'd wash up, change back, and stroll home to his wife and kids with a pocket full of cash.
This guy wasn't just living a double life. He was juggling two opposite worlds. Respectable family man by night, grimy street beggar by day. That's not just deception. That's a full-on identity crisis.
And he pulled it off for years. He'd built this perfect system. A little makeup kit, a stash of ragged clothes, even a secret bank account for his beggar earnings. At home, he was Neville St. Clair, doting husband, father of two, living in a cozy villa in Kent. On the streets, he was Hugh Boone, scarred, pitiful, a fixture of Swandam Lane. Nobody suspected a thing until that night.
Right, the night his wife saw him. That's when it all fell apart, huh?
Oh yeah. He was in his upstairs room at the Bar of Gold, his usual spot to change, when he heard her voice outside. He peeked out the window, and there she was, staring straight up at him. Panic hit him like a train. He tried to signal her, to somehow explain. But then Lascar burst in, probably to warn him about the commotion, and yanked him away from the window.
So why'd he vanish? Why not just come clean right then?
Because the police were already on their way. Mrs. St. Clair's shouting had drawn a crowd, and someone ran for a constable. Neville had seconds to decide, confess everything and ruin his life, or double down. He chose the latter. In a frenzy, he smeared on his makeup, threw on Boone's rags, and ditched his gentleman's clothes, except he didn't have time to hide them properly. When the police stormed in, they found Hugh Boone, not Neville St. Clair.
That's unreal. They were hunting for a missing man, and he was right there, playing the part so well they arrested him instead.
Exactly. He'd honed the role for years. Every limp, every whine, every twitch of that fake twisted lip. Even under arrest, he stayed in character, banking on the hope they'd never look twice at a filthy beggar. And they didn't, until Holmes showed up.
How'd Holmes figure it out so fast? Those hands?
The hands were the first clue, too pristine for a street rat. But Holmes had been piecing it together. The neatly folded coat, the coins, the lack of any struggle. It didn't smell like a murder or a kidnapping. It smelled like a cover-up. When he saw Boone, He tested his hunch. One swipe of that sponge, and the whole charade melted away.
That's genius. But what about the bloody coat by the river? How'd that fit in?
Neville admits he staged that later. After his arrest as Boone, he got a message to Lascar through a cellmate, slipped him a few shillings to plant the coat, cut his own finger for the blood, smeared it on, and had it dumped by the Thames to throw the police off. He figured if they thought he was dead, they'd stop looking.
Risky move. So what does Holmes do now? Turn him in for all this?
That's the big question. Neville's begging, "Please, Mr. Holmes, don't ruin me. I'll give it up, I swear." Mrs. St. Clair's clutching his arm, pleading too. "He's no criminal, sir, just a fool." Gregson's itching to haul him off. "He's wasted our time, Holmes, obstructing justice." But Holmes, he's calm, thinking it over.
I bet he lets him off. Holmes gets people. He's not just about locking them up.
"You're dead right." He looks at Neville and says, "Mr. St. Clair, you've built quite the masquerade, but it ends here. Swear to me Hugh Boone is dead, never to return, and I see no need to trouble the courts with this." Neville nods so hard his head might fall off. "I swear it, sir. No more begging, no more lies." Holmes turns to Gregson. "No crime's been committed, Inspector. A man's entitled to vanish if he likes, so long as he's alive to tell the tale."
And Gregson just goes along with that?
He grumbles, "This is madness, Holmes, but he's got no real case. No theft, no murder, just a guy who faked his own disappearance." Holmes claps Watson on the shoulder. "Come, Watson, our work's done. Mrs. St. Clair, take your husband home. I suspect he's had enough of London streets for a lifetime."
That's perfect. He doesn't just solve it. He ties it up with a bow. No punishment, just a promise.
Exactly. Neville goes back to Kent. Hugh Boone fades into legend, and Holmes proves once again he's not just a detective, he's a judge of character. Case closed.
Man, what a ride. From a missing man to a beggar's disguise, all unraveled with a sponge. What's next?
Oh, the next one's got scandal, blackmail, and a twist that'll keep you up all night. Buckle up, Alex. It's a wild one.
Subscribe for more content.